reconvene the advisory committee meeting out of recess. Next on the agenda, are there comments from the public regarding items not on the agenda?
Anybody recording the meeting other than the town?
Yep, it's being recorded. Thanks, Andy.
Other than the town?
Point of clarification, Nancy is not at this meeting, but she is going to be recording after or writing the minutes after the fact with the use of the recorded meeting. So next on the agenda, we have a discussion about the FY23 budget. And I am going to share my screen. Hopefully I do better than others do sometimes, but I'm going to sort of lay the groundwork for a budget discussion. So. How's that? Everyone see that first slide?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right, so tonight I'd like to have a discussion about the FY23 budget. This is the first of many conversations that the advisory committee is going to have about the budget over the next several weeks. And we're going to receive a lot of new information about the budget as well, culminating in AdCom's final vote on the FY23 budget request to send to annual town meeting. And we're going to take that vote by mid-March. For tonight, I'd like to speak for a couple of minutes first to set the table for our discussion. I have some slides here to display to help organize things. Now that most of our budget hearings have concluded, with the exception of water, harbor master, and school, I'm going to summarize where we left off at town meeting last year, and then where we proceed in the budget process from here. So after I go through my presentation, I'd like to hear from the AdCom members to just get a sense of their budget impressions so far, any questions, any comments. And so please don't be afraid to speak up or ask any questions. And I'm just going to go through the members list to call on people. So here's where we left off at annual town meeting 2021. AdCom brought a budget to town meeting that was unusual in that the budget relied on funding sources, one-time funding sources to meet expense requests. AdCom agreed that there were some unmet needs on the municipal and school sides that needed to be addressed, in particular to respond to effects of the pandemic. As written in the annual town meeting warrant, the comment for Article 6, which is the budget, read, in addition to the usual revenue sources, this budget relies on $5 million in one-time funds coming from several sources. Number one, $2.4 million from fund balance. Number two, $2.6 million in federal stimulus funds. And of those federal stimulus funds, $1.2 million came from ARPA, the American Rescue Plan, and $1.4 million in education funds from ESSER, which is Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. The comment also read, while at this time there is only broad guidance on the allowable uses of this federal stimulus funding, the town expects to be able to apply all of this funding to expenses. It is expected that the total federal stimulus funds for FY22 will be used to fund the additional request of 36 new full-time equivalents, FTEs, which are 32 FTEs in the schools to address demonstrable losses due to the pandemic, and 4 in municipal departments to address necessary municipal needs. Because a portion of the FY22 budget relies on one-time funding sources, the town will need to begin a collective effort to plan for how to sustainably fund the FY23 budget and beyond. These efforts include strategic financial planning in both the school department and municipal departments, and guidance from the town's master plan. If not enough revenue can be raised, possibly from an operating override, among other sources, or from identification of operational efficiencies, then the town will have to contract its services. So each year, the advisory committee includes in the annual town meeting warrant a report on the town's finances. It's a nice 12-page report that Bob put together last year that I'm going to have the pleasure of doing myself this year. In 2021, the report of the advisory committee detailed more information about the proposed FY22 budget request. For FY22, level services budgets were presented, but also included on the municipal side additional requests for funding to address essential needs of the town. Those were 4 positions for $306,479, plus funding and services for $477,725. And on the school side, recovery budget with an increase in services and personnel to address demonstrated educational deficits resulting from the pandemic, which were 32 FTEs for $2.3 million. The report had a couple of quotes in it that I wanted to read out to you tonight. Even before the arrival of the pandemic, balancing the budget was a challenge. As has been true for some time, revenue growth had not been keeping pace with increases in expenses needed to maintain level services and meet demands for new services. The advisory committee believes that the town would benefit from a long-term financial management plan, including an examination of capital priorities and service levels, all the while keeping in mind the impact on taxpayers and rating agencies. As part of these efforts, consideration should be given to potential new revenue sources, including whether a future Proposition 2.5 operational override may be appropriate. Although an override can provide revenue for additional services, particularly for the education budget, the allure of such new revenue must be balanced against the permanent impact of the resulting tax increase on the average homeowner. AdCom believes that the formation of an override study group at this time would be useful in addressing whether an override for the FY23 budget is necessary, and if so, in what amount. The report also addressed an unassigned fund balance, which in essence is the rainy day fund. The town's financial policy, as created by and updated every 3 years by the advisory committee, calls for the town to maintain an unassigned fund balance of between 16 and 20% of total annual expenditures. At the end of FY20, the percentage was 25.3%, the 9th year in a row that the upper bound was exceeded. The AdCom report went on to say that while AdCom believed it was appropriate to use a portion of unassigned fund balance to address the current financial crisis, it has always been anticipated that excess fund balance could be used to defray the total cost of future large capital projects. And the maintenance of fund balance within the parameters of the town's financial policy is important for the maintenance of the town's AAA bond rating. So on July 1st, in the new fiscal year, the advisory committee began its work with our three new members. In September, the Sustainable Budget Task Force was created and began its work, chaired by Select Board member Liz Klein, with Assistant Town Administrator for Finance Michelle Monsegur, Donna Smallwood, former AdCom Chair, Acting School Superintendent Gary Maestas, School Business Manager John Ferris, and School Committee member Nes Parenti. They were tasked to develop and analyze one or more options for a 5-year sustainable forecast, FY23 to 27. A sustainable financial forecast would use realistic assumptions for revenue and expenditure growth that allow the town to, 1, provide services that meet residents' expectations, and 2, meet ongoing expenditure obligations through regularly occurring revenues. And their target would be to report out the findings to town administrator by mid-January 22. AdCom had 3 liaisons attend the task force's weekly meetings, George, Dave, and Kristen. And thank you for attending those meetings for us. In October, the advisory committee invited our bond advisors, capital market advisors, and former AdCom chair, Jim Taylor, to come speak to us about the town's bond rating. We learned about the town's AAA bond rating, how we got it, how this rating benefits the town with access to capital markets, savings due to low interest rates on bond issuance, and the ability to use and roll over bands, bond anticipation notes, which is a short-term type of bridge loan the town can use ahead of locking in long-term financing on large projects. From the discussion, AdCom also learned that the rating agencies favor a town's annual budget with self-sustaining capability without relying on use of one-time funds. and that CMA clients are recommended to aim for a percentage of unassigned fund balance closer to 30% of TAE. In December, the advisory committee completed its every 3-year review and update of the town's financial policy. Some policy points to note. AdCom reaffirmed its goal to manage expenditures and the town's financial resources to preserve the town's credit rating. The town should maintain unassigned fund balance at a level of no less than 16% and as high as 20% of TAE. When unassigned fund balance exceeds 20%, the advisory committee should recommend that town meeting apply such amounts in excess of 20% to items such as unfunded long-term liabilities, long-term and non-recurring capital expenditures, retirement of debt, or target tax relief. Excess fund balance should not be used to fund recurring operational budget items. There was also recognition that despite prudent fiscal management, the expenditures necessary to fund the level of services required by the town may exceed the revenues generated by the town, principally from the tax levy on a long-term basis. And as a consequence, an operational override may be necessary to reset the town's tax levy revenues. In December 2021, our annual fund balance memo came out, the fruition of Stu Nickerson's hard work. It is a snapshot of total general fund balance as of June 30th, 2021. Here's what we learned. The percentage on that date of unassigned fund balance to TAE was 30.85%, an amount of $12,083,036. Fund balance has 4 categories: unassigned, assigned, committed, and restricted. Total fund balance grew $5.6 million, mostly attributable to 3 categories. Surplus of revenue of approximately $2.22 million, including $1.49 million payback from the Weir River water system for acquisition expenses. Number 2, a budget surplus, also known as turnbacks, of approximately $4.38 million, which includes $2.9 million in receivables from federal COVID-related reimbursements, minus the use of fund balance of approximately $1 million to balance FY20 budget due to decreased revenue due to the effects from COVID. Stu Nickerson recently calculated the 20-year average of unassigned fund balance that is spent annually to help supplement the cost of warrant articles each year, which is $2.2 million. So given that metric, after the $12 million of unassigned fund balance calculated as of June 30th, 2021, now that we have articles from town meeting 2022 in our hand, we would be looking at $10 million of unassigned fund balance. Potentially, that $2.2 million may be actually larger number used by annual town meeting this year, because the warrant articles that we are about to consider may have larger requests of fund balance. We will find out. In December 2021, we got our first 5-year forecast. This forecast was a first look at our estimated sources of revenue and uses. The forecast definitely needs some fine tuning, including the input of the school budget request for FY23. It needs updated numbers on state aid and local receipts, and it needs some cleanup and clarification of some numbers. The forecast in December indicated at that time a shortfall for FY23 of $7.2 million, of which a $5 million hole we created from FY22's budget process. An updated version of the forecast comes on February 3rd, that's next week, and we'll go over it at our meeting that night. In January 2022, we had a discussion of personnel costs with the Personnel Board Chair. AdCom invited David Pace to talk with us about the municipal side of town and the Personnel Board, which conducted its first comprehensive review of the wage and classification system in 20 years. This study affected the salaries of about 80 non-union employees. Equity adjustments plus salary adjustments were made. The town also negotiated 6 contracts with, new contracts with 6 unions, which included raises, a mostly 3% annual increase, which also included equity adjustments. These adjustments and contracts catch up municipal employee compensation to align with the town's personnel approach to compensate just above the median of the 20 benchmark communities. And now we're seeing all those adjustments in the salaries part of the budget request for FY23. In February 2022, that's next week, the Sustainable Budget Task Force will present its final report to a joint meeting with the Select Board, School Committee, and Advisory Committee. The report should provide a roadmap for town leaders to make financial decisions moving forward. And in the short term, will provide various options on how to proceed with this year's budget process. I look forward to that presentation next Tuesday, which is the culmination of the hard work of that task force. So just quickly about what we know so far about the FY23 budget request. On the municipal side, AdCom has held most of its budget hearings, like I said before, with the exception of the water company and the harbor master. And on the school side, the school committee has had a couple of budget hearings attended by our ACES subcommittee, and AdCom will have a chance to hear the school budget request at a hearing soon. So we're seeing level services budget requests with some additional requests to support continuing that level of service and needs. On the municipal side, the total request is $34 million, $34.5 million, a growth of 10.3%. That is with the additional requests. Without additional requests, the growth would be 8%. There's an additional 10 FTEs requested for a total of $766,887, additional expenses of $86,000, and also $80,000 in a combination of training and overtime, for a total of $932,887. I would expect that these additional requests will change when the town administrator shares with us his final budget recommendations. AdCom usually receives this budget memo at the beginning of our budget hearing process, but that report was held this year pending the final report of the Sustainable Budget Task Force. And on the school side, the total request $62.6 million, a growth of 1.43%, which is a number that's net of a one-time decrease of $1.3 million in out-of-district tuitions for special education. There's a request of 8 additional positions for $666,366. That's a really creepy number. And additional expenses of $184,243 for a total of $860,609. So next steps. We're going to get a lot more information in the coming weeks. We're going to get a 5-year forecast, an updated version coming out next week, which will include the school budget request, updated state aid amount, and the motor vehicle excise amount. And then we're going to get another forecast on March 4th, which will include the health insurance costs and other sources of revenue may be identified, such as releasing excess overlay. The school committee will present its budget at a joint hearing to the select board and advisory committee. Capital outlay will come out with its recommendations. As we head through the warrant article process, we will be able to calculate the potential costs of warrant articles, whether they're going to be through borrowing or using unassigned fund balance. The select board will have discussions in its meetings about what direction to proceed with this year's budget based on the Sustainable Budget Task Force report. The town administrator will provide a budget memo with recommendations for the municipal additional requests. And it'll all culminate in a final vote that AdCom needs to take by mid-March, so we can send the warrant out to print and then to everyone's mailbox ahead of town meeting. So thank you all for listening. I'm going to stop sharing unless anyone has any questions about any of my slides right now.
No, I think you can stop sharing, Julie.
Okay. So, like I said at the beginning, I wanted to take everyone's temperature, but I wanted to take everybody first through where we've been and then the next steps. So I know that took a little while, but I just wanted to be thorough and just making sure that to review all of the information that we have available at this point. So I wanted to go through and just check in with AdCom members to see how everyone's feeling so far, what information you feel like you need, any questions, and just generally your impressions to date. So I am going to check in first with George.
Well, thank you, Julie. Well, very impressive presentation, and it certainly took me back into last year and reminded me of a number of different things which I'd like to comment on just briefly. But I think the first thing I would like to say is just to go back to that school budget and the 1.43% increase that you're showing, which, as you point out, is driven largely by a reduction in out-of-district tuitions. If we discount that reduction in tuitions, actual expenses for the school system go up about 3.6%. So while it's good to see a 1.43% number, you've got to realize that is being driven by the significant reduction in tuition expenses. So that's just my comment on the school budget at this point. So I guess, Julie, that I would say that this was a great presentation, and that for all of us who were on AdCom last year, it brought the discussion process right back to the front of our plates, and that was good. And for the new members, I think it serves as a good background and introduction to the process that we went through in coming up with a budget last year. As you pointed out, we added 36 new positions, both on the municipal and the school side. In my, as of last year, 4 years on AdCom, I had never seen a budget presented to town meeting that was not fully funded by recurring revenue sources. This budget that we're under right now does not have fully funding recurring revenue sources. As you pointed out again, we use one-time funds with the expectation that for this budget we're looking at right now, the FY23 budget, we would have the opportunity, or the town would have the opportunity of voting on an override that would provide a permanent source of funding for the 36 positions that we added. When this year's budgets first came to me and I started looking at them, I was a little bit surprised by the additional requests for personnel, both on the municipal side and on the school side. It struck me as being a little difficult that we have a huge hole in that we have 36 positions that are unfunded. And now we're looking at, on the school side, an additional 8, and on the municipal side, another 10. So in essence, we've taken a fairly large hole, which based on the initial forecast is somewhere around $7.2 million. And we've potentially added a whole number of additional unfunded positions. So we've made the hole even bigger, or potentially even bigger. So when I sit back and I look at it, I'm really troubled by why we would do that, why we would add to the hole instead of at least first finding a permanent solution to it by finding a revenue source, getting town meeting approval for an override that would provide the additional funds. And then we could look to add staff where staff is necessary. I will add that I've sat through the 3 school department presentations. I think there are some legitimate requests for necessary staff in there. I would certainly encourage the school committee to look to maybe repurpose some of the 32 positions that were added last year to fill some of these holes. But as far as adding additional staff that's unfunded, I'm very uncomfortable with that. So.
Okay, thanks, George. I'm going to go next to Dave.
Julie, thanks for the presentation. I think you laid out the case really well. I guess I'll just say by way of, it has a little bit of a Groundhog Day feeling for me. I mean, I think almost a year ago today, we didn't know yet about the one-time funds that would flow to us from the federal support and state support, and we were faced with this challenge as well. I think, you know, in many respects, at least as I sit here today, I don't see a case to be made for unwinding the positions that were hired. You know, just speaking for myself, and as been a liaison for the Sustainable Budget Task Force, I've sat in a lot of those meetings. You know, the thought that we would have been able to pull off any of the work that that group is doing without Michelle being a dedicated assistant town administrator for finance, as opposed to, you know, if she had been wearing all the hats instead of just the finance hat, I don't think it would have been achieved. I mean, the amount of work that they have done in that task force that you'll see with the report is enormous. So, you know, on the municipal side, I can't speak to all the other roles that have been added, but I haven't heard anybody suggest that all of a sudden we've got people sitting around with nothing to do. And I think likewise on the school side, when the data is collected, I think we're going to see that the positions that we approved and town meeting approved were added and have made a difference, but that the deficit persists, and that, you know, deciding that they could be rolled back starting in the fall, I don't think there's going to be any evidence to support that by a long shot. So, you know, that kind of brings us to where we are today, which is an out of balance budget a year later after we filled some gaps. And as of tonight, you know, I don't have an answer for the question. I'm looking forward to seeing the scenarios that the Sustainable Budget Task Force is going to put together. I think, you know, at the end of the day, the town is going to have to make a decision about what kind of services it wants to pay for. The question is, when is the appropriate time to put that question before the town, and when can the town consider that with all of the information that it needs? And I would just say, I think many of you know this, but just as you think about the next couple months of these conversations, the school committee is still undertaking its strategic planning process. We have a interim superintendent that will be replaced by the full-time superintendent, the new permanent superintendent. I believe that's July 1 or thereabouts. So that individual, you know, I think could arguably deserves a say in what the school strategic plan would look like. You know, all of which leads me to the point that within the next month, can you really put together a override number that you're comfortable with, and that you don't feel either overshoots the mark to give you some cushion or undershoots it because there's data we don't have? And that's the question I think I'm still wrestling with. And we'll just have to wait for more information. So I guess I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Bob?
Thanks, Julie, and thanks for a great overview. I remember back to my earliest years on the AdCom when we saw our first 5-year forecast, and we saw we had a deficit of $2 million or so. And I would say to myself, oh my God, how are we ever going to close that? And invariably it was done over the last 5 years. With what was often referred to as the secret sauce, a little bit of excess overlay, a little bit here and there, and somehow we could manage that. But a $7 million deficit, which I think in future forecasts is a number that's likely to go up, given the increases in the budgets that we have already seen and in the historic numbers we've seen from the school committee. And I am not, I hope the Sustainable Budget Task Force has a great answer to that, but especially in the short term, I don't expect that they are going to have one. So I think we are faced with the decision that the town had back in 2008, 2009, of either cutting services or doing an override. And of course, in 2009, that's the last time we've had an override. 13 years ago, which I think speaks to the quality of the financial management of the town of Hingham. Some towns have overrides every year. And at the same time, Hingham, by having unused tax levy, has undertaxed its citizens over the years until last year. I'm not hearing any voices really saying that we need less services. I know, and having heard from the police and fire recently, they'd like to see us back to levels that were higher in the past and that are recommended by national bodies now. I think we need to recognize, particularly in looking at the out years that we really haven't talked about yet, that the projected deficits are only increasing. And I'd like to make the observation that was made many times last year, that in terms of the use of unrestricted fund balance, yeah, it's an option to use unrestricted fund balance to balance an operating budget, although that's against our financial policy, but it only makes the out years worse. And it truly does kick the can down the road. I think that unrestricted fund balance really should be used for the major capital projects that we have immediately pressing upon us, the Foster School and the public safety facility. And of course, we have other major capital projects that include the town hall that are going to come down the road in future years. So I think what I'm seeing is the likely need for an override in an amount to be determined to basically reset the tax base of the town of Hingham to provide the level of services that this community deserves. And I know the clock is ticking, and I think I'll just leave it there.
Thanks, Bob. Next, how about Evan?
Oh, thanks, Julie. And Julie, I think that presentation was really helpful. I have a little PTSD from sitting through that last year and the hand wringing and things that we went through. You know, I'll just pick up on kind of where Bob left off. Bob, I think you said it well. You know, I've been on for 5 years now, and every time we've brought up the word override, it's like, you know, George Carlin's 7 words you can't say on TV. You know, the mic drops and everybody kind of, you know, gets a little tense. And the only thing I just disagree. I'm not sure a town that has, you know, periodic overrides is necessarily poorly run financially. I think that it's saying that the citizens of that town are choosing to invest in things, whether it's people, resources to get things done, new schools, new, you know, police facilities, pools, what have you. And it does feel a little bit like Groundhog Day just about every year at this time. A couple of things I just wanted to point out. And George, I think you said, you know, kind of, you know, digging into the school budget a little bit, unfunding, you're not comfortable, you know, adding new with not having the right funding sources. not funding that was a choice that was made this time last year when we decided to, kind of kick the can to this year, hoping that the Sustainable Budget Task Force, which was the override committee we called it at the time, would have been able to do their work. And I understand that that committee has done a tremendous amount of work. It's not an enviable task to go through, but we have this kind of mythology in town that we don't do overrides and we don't do more than one thing at a time. And this kind of single threading that we've done of various projects, whether it be schools, water companies, other things, has kind of led to this log jam of things that need to be addressed, whether it's public safety facility. I mean, the fact that we're still talking about Foster School to me is embarrassing. Seawalls, things that just a town pool. I actually thought on our previous meeting, Judy Sneath really spoke eloquently about, it is a place that kind of brings the community together. So I look at these things and say we have to choose, and I don't know who ultimately gets to be the decider. I'm pretty sure it's not the advisory committee. We can recommend, but it's not really up to us because we're appointed, not elected. But I do think we need to choose kind of what we want to be and how we want to address it. And I do think Bob said it well. I haven't heard anybody asking for fewer services in town. And I think the face and shape of the town has changed over the last 20 years, certainly that I've lived here in town. And there are a number of things I think we need to, in good conscience, do and kind of pass on to people who live in this town 10 to 20 years from now. The one thing I will say, though, the budgeting and forecasting, and that 5-year forecast model drove me crazy this last year, and it will drive me crazy this year, because we both budget conservatively and forecast conservatively, which leaves to amplification in out years that I think Bob said it was 2.5 million when he started, and it never really comes to pass quite that way. So, we can get ourselves really excited about something that's going to happen 5 years from now, when I think we need to make choices this year to kind of reset the tax levy, to override appropriately. If we need to discuss as a town, we might need to do it twice, this year and next year, because I think it is fair to say we're going to have a new superintendent in schools. We're going to have a couple of new buildings. We're still working on a strategic plan from the schools, and we're still in the kind of a middle of a pandemic. And I've heard from educators, police, and fire that mental health is something that everybody's really concerned about. So I would not be comfortable pulling resources away from the schools, police, fire, anybody that says they need these resources to address the things that this town's going to need over the next couple of years. This is not a one and done. This isn't the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. There's some real stuff that's gone on. And I think, our kids, I think, police and fire and kind of mental health for, folks that live in town and seniors is going to be important to deal with. So I think we're going to need to do more, not less. So I'll kind of stop there, but I am very interested to see what comes out of the Sustainable Budget Task Force. But I fear, I think Bob, you might have echoed this, that it might stop short of an actual recommendation and provide us possibilities. So I think at some point there needs to be a group of folks who agree to a path forward, whether it's using our excess fund balance or choose an override or what have you, but something has to be done. We can't keep kicking this can down the road. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Evan. Andy?
I just have some minor questions, I guess. The first is, are we able to obtain the increases in salaries and generally personnel costs in absolute dollars and percentages as a result of the GovHR study and wage classification plan adopted by the Personnel Board, and 2, the recently signed collective bargaining agreements? The reason I ask is because my memory of reviewing the budgets is that virtually all of the departments' salary budgets went up very significantly in the 8 to 10% range, if not higher, with regard to salaries. And if that is primarily due to equity adjustments and standardization, if you will, then I think we should know that so that we can explain that as a necessary part of the budget. So I'd like to ask for that. One small point before I forget, it did occur to me when Mary Powers and Dave Anderson were talking at the select board meeting about perhaps having a better system of deciding how much debt to repay instead of leaving it up to the entirely to the CPC, to perhaps having this body consider some guidelines, number one, and number two, consider whether that's something where excess fund balance could go each year, or at least the next few years, as the CPC is dealing with that question of how much to reduce its debt for Lanner and the Benjamin Lincoln House. That, just wanted to make that note. I don't know if anybody else think that that's a wise idea, but I wanted to think about it. The other thing that occurs to me is we have not seen the final of the master plan. It's supposed to be out any time now. And so we have no sense of what the recommendations of the master plan committee might cost the town down the road. My assumption is that there will be significant costs. I shouldn't say my assumption, it's really just a guess, but I assume master plans tend to look to improve life for the residents, and that will tend to cost money. So I'd like to be able to, when we're thinking about the budget, be able to get some sense of what the master plan looks like in the immediate future. There were two other things that, well, one thing we've talked about is a survey of the capital needs of the, I guess, the buildings, the structures in the town. I don't know that has been done, but my memory is we talked about that last year, so that we could help capital outlay probably budget for that. I'm hoping that the master plan committee will also give us something like a survey of additional services. In other words, a sense of what the residents of Hingham think they need by way of additional services. And the final point, of course, as others have made, I'm very anxious to see what the Sustainable Budget Task Force report looks like. And though that the information that I've listed, I think is probably necessary for us to make a hard take a hard look at the budget. One last point with regard to what George said, that we consciously funded 36 full-time positions last year, knowing we did not have a permanent funding source. I don't think any of us thought that all of those positions would go away after 1 year of the pandemic, and now that we've seen the pandemic itself hasn't gone away, there's no reason to think that the school needs fewer than that number of people to continue the effort to get the students back to where they would like them to be. So that I haven't seen anything about I haven't attended the meeting, so I don't know anything about the 8 additional positions that are being requested. On a percentage basis, it strikes me that 40 new positions in 2 years is pretty high, but I hasten to add that, of course, we recognized last year that a lot of this was brought about by the pandemic and the need for additional resources. And I haven't gotten my arms around the 10 additional positions requested by the municipal side this year. The presentations I've heard struck me as quite reasonable. But then again, I'd be a terrible CPC member, because I'm sure everything I heard would strike me as being quite reasonable on those presentations. So that's about where I am in terms of thinking what additional information I would like to see.
Thanks, Andy. Daveline?
So this is my 4th year on AdCom, and I've learned a lot about the town. And one of the things I've learned is, and I don't know if this is just the result of 2008, 2009, although I don't think that's the case. We've never really been willing to pay for what we want, and we haven't. And my response to the salary increases and the wage classification is I'm actually embarrassed that we have treated our town employees so poorly. And when this is the 4th year I've been on the public safety budget part, and constantly one of the things both on police and fire have been that we lose people who go to other towns to do that work because presumably they have a better situation. So that to me, and we're racking up for a variety of different reasons, a pretty hefty rainy day fund. And it feels like it's probably been raining off and on, and we haven't recognized the rain, or we don't want to put up the umbrella. I don't know what it is. And our capital needs. And I'll just say in response to something Andy said, so one of the things about trying to figure out what buildings need and what structures need is the town is in a position right now that it doesn't quite know. Michelle talked about this last night at our capital outlay meeting, that was last night. That one of the problems is things are on hold until we know if there's going to be a new public safety facility, because that so much will depend upon if that building happens, then things happen at town hall, then things can happen. There's a question then about what do you do with the north fire station and all these sorts of things. So it feels like a lot of things have sort of bumped up against one another because we haven't been doing things in some sort of perhaps logical reason. And I'm not saying that in terms of fault at anyone. It just seems like that's where you were. So when I look at some of the salary things, police officers have been at 53 for at least 20 years. And Hingham has grown. And so to say, do we need more police? I suspect we probably do. We heard Chief Murphy talk about what the fire needed. I suspect we need, the school, I haven't gone to those meetings, but there's, I'm not questioning that. So it seems to me there's increased personnel cost. There's certainly increased capital cost. I mean, we sat last night with the fire budget, and the fire budget would totally overtake our entire capital outlay budget, which is why there's that Article T on fire and large capital projects. So I don't see, I agree with the idea that we need to reset. I think that reset is an override that would reset these positions and these things. I also think we have to think about how we deal with people in our community for whom a tax increase is really harmful. And so how do we do targeted tax relief? I think to become, when I remember one year at town meeting, I hadn't been here very long, and there was some discussion about spending money on something. And I'll just never forget, this person stood up and said, well, if people can't afford to live here, then they just need to leave. And that's so wrong on so many levels. So somehow we have to make this work, but I think an override is what we need. And my fear is, as a community, people don't understand the costs. So, people understand their piece of the pie. I mean, I know you all get, I'm sure, tired of me talking about affordable housing. And, there are people who their investment is in the schools, and there are people who are invested in other things. The senior center, we had the year where I think every meeting, we were meeting in person. We had a group of seniors and a group of people from Foster, and they were all coming to yell at us, basically. So I think one of the things we have to think about is, how as a community do we address this, and how do we make people understand what we have to address in that way? And I'm looking for, I thank you, Julie, for that. I agree, it's kind of PTSD in sort of looking at that and remembering. I mean, I think it was Dave said something about, or no, maybe it was Mary Power talked about being queasy. I don't know. I've been sitting here being queasy for about 20 minutes now, because it's going to be a hard work ahead of us. And I don't know what I don't know what town meeting will do. I mean, I think there's a real question of how broad people understand what these issues are. So that's it for me. Sorry.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Daylene. Brenda?
Let's see. I will admit to feeling like it's a little difficult for me to focus in on all the information that you presented today, Julie. So I'm looking forward to seeing the slides again and thinking them through further. This is only my second year in AdCom, and last year's budgeting process was peculiar in lots of ways, and I kept hearing that from those of you who had more experience. But it was also clear to me that the services that people expect and want in this town, we didn't have enough money to continue to pay for them. So I think it's been sort of in my expectation that we were going to need to change the tax levy, do an override. How we calculate that amount, I'm hoping that the Sustainable Budget Task Force gives us some guidelines, but it does seem as if, as a town, we need more money to accomplish the things that we as a town want. I really appreciate the comments of all of my colleagues. It's sort of helping me think about things in much sort of broader ways. But I think the piece I most want to comment on is, it seems like it's going to be our job to provide the information to the rest of our town residents about how, what it is that the town seems to be saying they want, and therefore what they will need to put together in terms of money to pay for it. So I think that's going to be our job as the process goes forward this year. So I think that's all I have to say for now.
Thanks, Brenda. Kristen?
Yeah, I think everyone's covered a lot. I am careful to speak to anything from sitting in on the Sustainable Budget Task Force. Obviously, we're privy to a little bit more information that I don't want to share before the presentation. And I don't know if once they give that information, if it's going to be able to affect this year or more for outer years, like we already know is look even worse. So we need to focus on this year and what can be done for this year. I think something that you talked about in the presentation, and it's me being my second year, I'm not as aware of how this all works, but you talked about the money that is turned back that goes to fund balance every year, which seems like a significant amount. I do understand that during the budget process, money that is not used for a certain thing that we approved for can't be then used for something else, if that's my understanding. But it just seems like a significant amount is being turned back every year that we're approving in these budgets. So I'm just curious where that all stemming from, and is there a way for certain budgets to keep that money versus turning it back? I don't know how that all works. So something to talk about later, but that just seems like another thing that's contributing to the growing fund balance, that then every year we're looking at it becoming larger and yet not really touching. So it's not really fixing that problem either. So just something else to think about.
Well, I think Sue does a really good job of answering the turn back question. So I'm gonna put you on the spot, Sue, because
No, because actually I was going to raise my hand to answer that, but I didn't want to
Yeah.
interrupt.
And can I just
Um,
ask one thing before you start? Is it the same on the school side as it is for the municipal side for turnbacks? Is it a same policy, different? And if it's not the same, can you explain why, if you even know that?
Okay, I'll take one part first. Usually last year was a little different, Kristen, because what we had was we had to do receivable entries for Plymouth Cares and FEMA. Had we not done that, then a lot of departments would have been in deficit because we spent the money for Plymouth Cares and we had to get it back. That's why last year was a significant amount of turnbacks. Usually turnbacks are about $1 million, maybe a little bit more. That's less than 1% of your total budget. So we are budgeting at a 99% accuracy. I don't know how you can do any better. A lot of times, a lot of the turnbacks happen to be for vacancies in some of the departments. A huge one is DPW, police, and fire, because they can't hire the people. Actually, what Dave Aline had said, a lot of employees we cannot attract to Hingham because we're at the 51st percentile. I cannot speak to the schools because I don't know. I have never done a comparison of salaries, but I do understand from what I've heard, they are in the top 3 out of our 20 towns. We are at the 10th for the municipal side. Turnbacks, what a department does not use at June 30th, they have to turn back. Unless there is an invoice and a project that has been started and has not finished, they can encumber that money into the next year to pay for those invoices and or projects. The schools have a PO system. And what the school does is encumber any outstanding POs. If that is not used, it just goes to fund balance the next year. The school committee has the authority to spend the money however way they wish, whether it's on salaries, expenses, or whatever. The municipal side cannot do that. Does that help?
Yes. I guess also, since I'm just seeing the turn back for the first time.
Yeah.
You're explaining that that's not how it always is.
No, that last year was quite exceptional.
Okay.
thanks, Sue. I'd like to add one thing about the what we hear about the benchmarks for the teachers is that some teachers' positions are considered to be in the top end of the sort of benchmark scale, but then there's other positions that aren't necessarily that high in their payment. So I don't know, maybe that's something that we can ask the schools for more clarity on, but if they can provide that information. But I just wanted to say that it's not across the board, that top 3 spot. And then also, I just wanted to mention that I don't think I laid out correctly or clearly enough in my report earlier, that just to remind everybody that when we come to an agreement on the budget for the schools, you know, they talk to us about what they want to spend the money on, but we just give them a lump sum of money. So they're the ones who decide and can allocate and do different things. They have the power to do that within their own budget. So, you know, they'll come to us and say why they want the extra money and for example, these things. But in the end, the schools have that authority to spend the amount that's given.
And that's true with their capital outlay request as well. They ask for specific projects, but once they have the amount, they can spend it however they want.
Thank you. All right, so Al had another hearing. He had to go tonight for his job. So I'm sorry we can't hear from him. But Tina, do you want to check in?
Sure. There have been so many great points made tonight. It's so valuable to hear everyone's perspective. So thank you so much, Julie, for doing this and for your presentation. I too am really looking forward to the presentation next week by the Sustainable Budget Task Force, and I'm hoping that they have the secret sauce somehow that we need to get through this. When I was trying to think about, what are my concerns after you sent your email, I read through last year's warrant, and I was reading this little piece that said, we currently lack the means to fund most of the fiscal year 22 budget additions in future years. Assuming a 2% growth rate in municipal and education expenses, the town's 5-year forecast shows annual deficits in each of the next 5 years ranging from 2 to 3.8 million per year. And future deficits increase significantly if higher budget growth rates are assumed. So I agree that we really, I'm pleased that our collective bargaining agreements have brought so many of our town employees up to probably where they should be. I think that's also having a big impact over last year on where the deficit was. And I was trying to find the forecast sensitivity model and the financial planning model on the select board's website to fiddle with that. And I guess that's coming out next week.
Yeah, so my guess is they took it off the website because those models have been updated and improved, and we're gonna the task force will, I believe, spin us through some scenarios through those forecasting tools. But I'll follow up to make sure that we get copies of that tool that we can use.
Great. So for the 2023 budget, I guess we have 3 options. We can contract services, and I agree with everybody that we have not heard that Hingham needs less services. We can use one-time money, or we can move forward with a potential operational override. Using one-time money and kicking the can down the road, I agree with everybody else. We're just creating a larger problem in the future. But when we talk about an operational override, I agree with Evan that I don't think we should be afraid of taking multiple overrides to town meeting to allow the town to make decisions. And educating them about what it is that the services that they want and what they really cost, and really letting them have a say in that process. So I wrote down my concerns. They were mostly covered, I think. I'm concerned, the paths to a balanced budget, and it's funny, Caitlin said, or I'm sorry, Kristen said, we haven't heard from the Sustainable Budget Task Force yet, so maybe these are jumping the gun and they'll have answers to all of these issues. But we don't have an actual way to pay for the 36 FTEs we hired last year, or a way to pay for the contractual obligations we made during our collective bargaining agreements. And during our budget hearings, I'm hearing really legitimate requests to add additional unfunded staff. I am worried about the cumulative effect on taxes of large capital projects, because with building costs increasing, I'm afraid there's going to be sticker shock together with an override for the taxpayer. I don't want to use fund balance to pay operating costs because we're building a budget that's not structurally sound, and I don't want to wait for a gun to your head override that says if we don't pass this, we're going to have to contract a lot of services. So I fully support town meeting having a voice in making decisions about funding our budget. And I'm really looking forward to the presentation next week by the Sustainable Budget Task Force.
Excellent. Thanks, Tina. Matt?
I just would echo what kind of Dabbling was saying earlier, is sitting on capital outlay, you see a lot of these requests come in, and it's become increasingly challenging to talk to these different people looking for money to say, well, we have to wait your ask relative to police cars or guns or ambulances and things like that. And time again, it happened again last night, happening last week, we're turning down requests for things that are, I think, really important. And I feel for these people who are looking for these requests. So in this forum, we typically talk about Foster, we talk about the pool, and these are big projects, but there's a long list of small projects too that go denied every year because capital is whatever it is, 2 to 5% of the operating budget every year. So I'm in the camp of investing in projects that have an ROI for the town, that mean a lot to bringing the community together. And I meant what I said earlier when I was making the comments about the pool, is that community building aspect of a lot of these projects is important to me. It's important to the people who are raising families in this town. And you think about how much money individual families are increasingly spending out of town at country clubs, private schools, Weymouth Club. Like it's amazing having grown up in this town and then seeing where people spend their time and money outside the town. That's why it's so important to me, is bringing people back to these town services and spending on these projects that are necessary. So I don't necessarily have a call to action, but I've kind of seen it firsthand through capital, how many requests go kind of unfunded, neglected, and the frustration you hear from people when they come to the capital. It's very real, but that's all.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Caitlin?
Thanks, Julie. The presentation was super helpful as a first year to kind of get up to speed on what was happening in prior years. And I think, just in general, as the first year on this committee, just really, it's been so eye-opening in terms of, how the community runs, how we invest in our community, and the gaps that exist today, at least from my perspective. And, some of my impressions that I'm going to be echoing others' comments here, but just, it definitely feels like it's that we're in the spot where we just need to catch up for multiple year decisions made over multiple years. In terms of even just seeing the amount of equity adjustments and the amount of what those equity adjustments are, just speak to the fact that they haven't been addressed in a while. And I think Dave Lean made a great point in terms of, making sure that we're taking care of the people that take care of our town. And it's just been eye-opening in that perspective. And I think I heard, and I don't even know where I heard this, but somebody was just making a comment that, some people that work for the town can't even afford to live in the town. And I think that's, something that we should really make sure that we kind of think about. And I know through our financial policy and everything, where it's something that's always top of mind for us, but I just have to say it's been very eye-opening. I think the field trip that we took to go through, visit multiple buildings and just seeing the infrastructure of some of the, the police, the fire, the schools, it was very eye-opening, and I would say embarrassing, to be honest, in terms of how we're supporting the people that support our town. So I think it may be time we just need to address that as a community. And then just a note from the schools, and I got 3 boys in the Hingham school system, and so I'm living and breathing the impact of COVID, and it is not going away anytime soon, that's for sure. Just trying to catch up to that learning loss, and we just need to make sure that we support our schools there, and obviously making sure that how they come up with their budgets really address the issues that we're interested in the town. But there's a lot on our plate in terms of needing to fund the community. So probably stop it there. It's probably you know, it's been awesome just really trying to get into the weeds of how the community runs and how we need to work together to determine how we want to move forward with the services that we want as a community.
Thanks, Caitlin. And you know what? You brought up something I should have added to my presentation, the field trips.
Field trips
That's
were
another thing we did this fall to get us up to speed on some of the issues. So I'll have to add that as a post presentation addition, but thank you. Sarah.
Hi, gotta love being last. I don't know if there's much left to say. I have to say I really appreciate hearing everyone's perspectives, and I'm trying to learn being so new. And I feel like back to the first meeting with you, Julie, a little bit, drinking from the fire hose and absorbing all of the information. But I also am really grateful to hear such incredible commitment and intelligent thoughts and real drive to solve these problems. And particularly everyone saying we can't just keep kicking the can down the road. I'm excited to be a part of not doing that, and to hear what the Sustainable Budget Task Force has to say next, and hear the report of the school committee, and just try to come up with some solutions. And so to get real basic and possibly a dumb question, if we do move toward override, how does that, there's two components to that, right? There's a town meeting component and an election component. And so how, do we make like a recommendation to town meeting on the override and then it goes to an election, or how does that work?
Well, since
I don't mean to do a loaded question, but that's a
committee,
topic for another time.
had-
That's fine.
No, but I did actually last year, I went back to the language from the last time we had an override, and it's part of Article 6.
Yeah.
So you would get the budget recommendation, and then at the end, Sue, stop me if I get this wrong, but at the end of the budget request, then there's an extra section tacked on, and that's the override. And the amount or where it's directed to, what part of the budget. And so that would be a vote within Article 6 in the warrant at town meeting.
Okay.
And then if that passes,
Mhm.
then we would go, and that would be a question, local election within the week, the following Saturday.
Yeah.
So that would be something that the voters would have to pass at the ballots as well.
Okay.
On the ballot.
Okay. And
But,
who writes
so
that?
obviously I have to come up to speed on that.
Yeah, who writes the ballot question? Is that part of our charge, or
Who's the parliamentarian in the room here?
not me?
I mean, the language for the ballot, that'll be for an attorney or the town clerk to put on the ballot, but Article 6 and how that gets crafted, well, that's us.
Okay.
And Sarah, you're new, but none of us have done it either. It was 13
Okay.
years ago.
Yeah,
Okay.
13 years ago. Yeah.
Fair.
Yeah.
Bob was gonna jump in.
I think the select board will determine the language on the ballot.
Okay.
And there's also a great little, maybe 12-page pamphlet that the state puts out on overrides that we circulated last year, Julie. It might be good to circulate again,
Maybe.
that to all
Yeah.
our members,
Okay.
especially our new members.
Great.
Okay. I will dig that out. Thanks, Bob.
The
With
division.
that, I will
Anything
stop
else?
talking.
Oh, that's okay.
No, I'll stop. I'm trying to listen more than talk this year.
I
Thanks.
wanted to add that that Nancy McDonald, she's out of pocket tonight. She couldn't dial into the meeting, but she wanted to, I said, do you want to say something, the meeting, I'll read it for you. And she said that she agrees that the town has a lot of needs right now and is supportive of the identified needs but she's concerned about, finding a way to pay for it in the correct way, and is concerned about additional expenses in the budget right now, if we don't have identified a recurring source of revenue to pay for it. So, and then I guess I'll just throw in my 2 cents, which, by the way, I don't get a vote on the on the warrant articles or a budget unless we have a tie, which I really hope that we don't end up with a tie for anything this year, but just in case. Is that I am looking forward to next week, but I have the feeling we're going to also have a lot of discussions afterwards about how it's maybe a 2-step process, right? We learn about options that the town has moving forward, but at whatever point the town feels like it needs to reset the levy and do an override to pay for whatever things that we feel that we need, that needs to be hashed out, right? What the dollar amount is, what are the positions that the town feels like it needs. And that seems like a very important deliberative process that the town would need to go through. And the town, the voters need to have a lot of education because we have not had an override in so long. So that's something that I'm concerned about, but I am looking forward to getting more information in the coming weeks. And I appreciate you guys weighing in tonight, and we'll have a lot more good conversations. I wish we were all in the same room together. I'd pass around snacks and everything like that to get us through our meetings. But anyway, Andy, you had something?
Yeah, Nancy said as an addendum to that now that her triplets have graduated from the high school, she thinks the school budget should be cut.
No.
Obviously not, but
strike that from the record. Andy's trying to cause trouble.
Okay. The other thing I did want to, I'm sorry, I did want to add that I the points that people have made about the field trips and how impactful they were, I underscore that and wish we had videotaped them, and maybe we can do that at some point, because it is eye-opening to say the least. And I think, frankly, that to hear more about the capital outlays angst and the difficult decisions they have to wrestle with each year, and I think we should be prepared to hear and perhaps present more about that, especially if we're leading up to an override. I mean, these are all real problems, and as was pointed out, that it's been 20 years since a wage and salary compensation study was made, and that required significant adjustments, and that's too long a time. I mean, maybe we should think about adjusting the financial policy to include some direction to the personnel board to do that on a more frequent basis. I mean, I think the larger equity adjustments came on the municipal side of, and I think the fact that the collective bargaining agreements are reviewed, every 3 years typically, that keeps most of the union employees pretty much on top of where things should be. But if nobody's looking at that on a more regular basis on the municipal side, then maybe we should think about requiring that.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Caitlin?
Yeah, this is probably not a stupid question, but we focus so much on expenses. The sustainable budget task force will be focusing on potential like revenue sources going forward too, right? Okay.
Yes.
That was it. Thank you.
Kristen?
Sorry, just to go back to the override, I understand that it would have to go on the warrant and we're responsible for writing that, but who comes up with the amount? And Is that on the warrant, or is it just on the warrant for an override and then at the election, there's an actual amount? Or how does that work?
I don't know yet. I
I-
will.
I would think that we would come up with a recommended amount.
Mm.
And undoubtedly we'd have input from the select board. But I think if you look back at the warrant for the 2009 town meeting, it kind of shows the format in which the override is presented at the end of Article 6.
Okay. And it can only be looking at the current year. You can't look forward to future years.
We always budget just for
Yeah.
1 year.
Yeah.
And we need a balanced budget.
Okay.
So that if the override doesn't pass, the expenditures have to go down.
Hey, Julie, if I could just jump in for a second. Kristen, you make a
Yeah.
really good point there, which is that this kind of surprised me. So for example, let's assume that, making up numbers, the budget gap for this year is $4 million. But we look into the forecast for the subsequent year and the budget gap in the forecast there is, I don't know, 2.5. We're only allowed, and Sue, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I got this right last year. We're only allowed to do an override to close the budget gap in this year. So we can't override, if you will, even if we know the next year we're out of balance again. So the amount of the override becomes a really important question, and it becomes an important question about, as I kind of said at the top, like, do we have all the necessary inputs to come up with the right number? And are we going to find more inputs a year from now that's going to make the override we just did just a step on the way? So it is it's kind of a multi-level challenge, to say the least.
So the 2.5, that's a limitation, not a, you can't just ask for 2.5%. You ask for a number, you can't exceed 2.5. Is
The
that
2.5 is the change every year that's allowed.
okay?
What we're talking about doing is a step function to raise it, from which it
Okay.
will then grow 2.5%.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
it's that level reset that's the one that matters. Then we get the
Okay.
2.5 off of the new base.
Off of that. Thank you. Fair. Okay.
Okay, Caitlin, I see your hand raised still.
Yes,
Andy,
sorry.
too?
Just one more
Okay.
question around, like, what is our, almost and Andy kind of spoke to this, but like the communication strategy to the town, like obviously we send out the warrant, but where else do we, and I guess who does that? Like out to the community where this budget is going and the big questions that are being asked.
Well, it's the select board who will have their hearings, and they're going to talk about the
Okay.
decisions and what they want to do with the budget and what direction they want to take that in, and they will tell advisory committee what they want us to do or want the town to do, and then we'll deliberate that. But its policy is directed by the select board.
Okay, thank you.
Tina?
I think I have 3 questions, and I'm not sure if you can even answer them at this point.
Okay.
If we were to go forward with an override, don't we have to present a balanced budget that we would adhere to if the override didn't pass?
Yes. So,
That-
well,
that's
I don't know
why
if Sue
it's-
wants to say it, but you say you got the regular budget and then there's an extra piece at the end tacked on, and the tacked on extra piece is
Was
the
the
override.
override.
It's the
Yes.
extra. So if
Okay,
that doesn't pass, then just the regular budget that didn't include the override is what we would have to live with.
so the second question is, would we be stuck living with that, or could we then say, oh, changed our mind, we would like to use this unassigned fund balance to plug that hole?
I don't think you can do that after town meeting, so whatever.
After town meeting, no. On
No.
town meeting floor, yeah, anybody could do that.
Okay.
So Tina
Um,
just asked my question too. So like, can we be a little bit more specific about that? So we have to present 2 budgets. We as a deliberative body could decide to plug the hole with fund balance and balance a budget that is potentially equal to the override amount. No?
Yeah, can I just make an observation, Evan?
Yeah.
I think we're likely to be looking at capital articles for Foster in the public safety facility. And I think it's likely that some promise about the use of fund balance to offset the tax bite of the debt exclusion is going to be made in the comment on those articles.
So we're not asking for the full construction costs for either of those projects at town meeting this spring.
That's right,
Right.
at least so far.
And I
Well,
think
I mean,
you're
they
also for
submitted
the-
the warrant articles that it's going to be just asking for
Yeah.
construction costs. So,
Right,
I mean-
but that's coming down the road.
Right.
So
absolutely.
Well, and I think some of the question about the fire engine and the repairs that need to be done to Station 1 and 3, those may come out of fund balance as well. So, and that's about $1.5 million, I think, is what we're looking at the moment.
I mean, if you're talking about one-time money and we have this excess unassigned fund balance that we, do you look to what's the dig out on capital outlay? What are the things that we need to put money towards to get out from this backlog of projects? I don't know, but it's there's interesting questions.
So my last point was just that with Dave's, just noted $4 million override. I remember that operational overrides hit the taxpayer harder and faster than capital projects. And I thought I remembered that for each $1 million, it's a 1.1% impact to the taxpayer. So $4 million override would be 4.4% plus 2.5%. So that would be like an almost 8% tax raise immediately. Right? 7%. And then we're talking about going to potentially a special town meeting for Foster School and the public safety facility. And I just think we have to be really thoughtful about how we present these to the taxpayer, because I think it could be a really impactful change kind of right away to the taxpayer. So I think we need to tread carefully.
And every $10 million in excluded debt increases property tax bills by approximately 0.9% in year 1. So.
Wait a minute, no, that
Right,
can't be
the
right.
timing, there's a lot of things happening.
No,
When do you do it when?
that can't be right.
Well, all of these numbers are for the average household too.
Yeah, the average household.
I am highly confident that the task force report will include scenarios that look at these very numbers. So I think in a week, you'll have all that stuff in black and white and then access to those models, Tina, because I think directionally you're right. But I think when you see it in ink and then you look at how the models work, it does get your attention in a hurry, that's for sure.
Okay, just a couple more minutes and then we got to get going on our warrant articles. So Evan, you had your hand raised?
No, I'm gonna table it.
Okay, Andy?
Is there any chance, or is it even possible that the Sustainable Budget Task Force would recommend an override for this year, fiscal 23?
I believe they're going to give a assortment of options.
I mean, it is Hingham.
I'm sorry?
We'll have to wait till
I don't-
next
I
week to
can't-
find out.
Yeah,
And Andy,
Yeah.
one more week and your answer,
All
your
right, okay,
questions will
but
be answered. so.
the discussion we've been having is, I think, has assumed there would not be an override request this year. Well, forget it.
We don't know. We don't know.
hold my tongue and
And you
wait.
know what? It's nice to, it's good to have discussions about how we feel about, override yes, override no, when, and all that. And it's good to just have, I'm glad we're having this discussion, but we're going to find out more information next week. And then we march forward from there with, the next steps in the process. So Bob, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just pulled up the warrant from 2009. So in
Yeah.
Article 6, what was done is a balanced budget was presented. And then at the end of Article 6, there was a statement concerning an operational override. And it said the following amounts will be added to the respective budgets as indicated below, contingent upon affirmative action by the voters of the town on the ballot question to allow the town to assess an additional 1.1 million in real estate. And so then there were 6 budgets listed. So there was school department salaries, 888,000, school department expenses, 121,000, police department, 7565, contributory group insurance, et cetera, et cetera. So it would seem that if we are going to get to that point and follow a similar process, that in budgeting, we are somehow going to have to break out what the balanced budget is minus an override and what is going to be added to each budget in the event of an override. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sue.
The Board of Selectmen, I believe, did all that discussion. So, and then they recommended to advisory, and advisory recommended it to town meeting.
Okay.
Okay. So we have a couple of non-advisory committee members or guests on our meeting tonight. I'm not sure if they want to ask a question or jump in, but we do have a lot of business to get to for warrant articles. So does anyone have any comment or question? Okay, so next on our, thank you, everybody. This is really helpful. Hopefully it was helpful to you. So next we're going to go through our first hearings on the warrant articles. We're going to do 6 tonight, but it should be pretty straightforward because they are our perennials. And I want to thank our new members and Tina, not new members, but for putting this together and being the first on the line for presenting our warrant articles. So with that, I'll turn it over to Matt first for Article A, the Hannah Lincoln Whiting Fund / Trustees of the Bathing Beach.
Julie, you want me to read verbatim the article, the comment, and the recommendation? Or just speak about it?
Yeah, well, why don't you read the, everyone has or should have access to looking at the article language. But why don't you, Matt, explain through the comment what's happening here?
Sure. So in the comment, it is a perennial. It's a fund that was set up in 1915 for residents of South Hingham. If you look back kind of historically what this fund has actually dispersed, I know that's a question that's come up with this AdCom in previous sessions. So this fund dispersed $2,600 last year. I think prior to that, the last disbursement was $1,000 in 2017. So it's fairly straightforward. And there's actually one kind of twist to this warrant article this year, I guess. So the bathing beach is not something that shows up on this every year. I think that, I guess it's an indeterminate tenure. So Chris Daly's resignation is causing an addition to that, where there's an appointed or an elected person, Adrian Ramsey, that's part of the recommendation. And that's not something you would have seen in the warrant article last year.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Matt about his comment in the article? Daveline?
I have just a suggestion in the comment to actually put that money, the money that was dispersed this past year. Because I think sometimes people think there never is really money. It's available, but it never says. So just to say whatever that amount. So
The most recent year, the 2020
Yeah.
disbursement amount.
Yeah.
right. That I think would be useful for people to know.
Okay. I
Thank
should have
you.
also noted there were two small edits that were caught prior to this meeting. So Bob Curley, your point about select board rather than Board of Selectmen, I made that edit on one of these articles. And then the other one was from Sue, just mentioning that Laura Boyle, the first recommendation, is actually being reelected, not elected. So I guess she's on it most years. So just wanted to note those two edits that weren't in the Word document that I sent out earlier. But definitely I can make that edit. I think that's a good add.
Yeah, I think it just lets people know it's actually being used.
I had a quick question for you about the prior years that we had the Bathing Beach article added to this article, or Bathing Beach language. Did you, in the comment in those years, I don't think I've ever seen before where somebody that you name the person who's leaving the Bathing Beach trustees, and I'm not sure if that's information that would be necessary or useful. I'm not sure what people think about that, but
I agree with that. I wasn't sure why we were naming the individual either, but at first.
was that in previous years or?
I thought it was, but I know you and I were talking about the 2016 and the 2012, the last times we were doing it earlier, but I just think logically, I don't see why it's a relevant input. So you could just say the vacancy being filled resulted from a resignation of a trustee.
Just.
Or not even mention, you're saying just
elected to serve, to fill a vacancy, something like that.
The vacancy, okay.
I don't know, does anyone else have any strong feelings about that?
I assume it's a matter of public record who the trustees are, so who had left, so I don't, but I mean, it doesn't matter one way or the other, I guess. It's I don't think naming the person does anything nefarious about them, but maybe there is. So I think it could just say it wouldn't have to include it, I guess.
I agree with you, Daveline. I don't see any purpose necessarily in naming the outgoing person.
Yeah. And I'm not saying because I actually know the person who's leaving, but I don't know why he's leaving. But anyway, I don't know why. It just doesn't need. I don't know.
Well, just to fill a vacancy would be fine language.
So make that change and add in the 2020 disbursement amount into the comment. Into the comment, yeah, the comment for both, not the recommendation. Right.
Yeah, and then so you're going to update the recommended motion based on the Bob's edit about Laura Boyle be reelected. And yeah.
And then I think the comment I made about Board of Selectmen, Select Board actually appears in the Article B. So do you want me to hit that next, Julie?
Yeah, well, so I want to know, well, since we have, let's see, Andy's raised his hand, but what I'd like to do is sort of get these last, whatever, if anyone has any edits, and then I'd like to take a vote on this article, and then we'll go to the next article.
Yeah.
Andy?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, did you say, Matt, that last year $2,000 was distributed in the distribution before that? The last one was 2017?
That was my understanding, and Sue, I think you and I, yeah, so Sue's nodding there. Yes, 2,600 in 2020, $1,000 in 2017.
How is it that a $15,000 trust established 100 years ago has so little income?
This is a perennial question of a perennial article.
Yeah, but it's not, it doesn't sound like it's distributed. Well, anyway, that's I'll leave that for Matt to contemplate, but.
Well, I think, but in the comment, it talks about the fund assets being 17,000. I don't know if this answers your question or not. I don't know if the initial principal 15,000. I understand your point, but it was in 1915, it was 15,000. That's how you read that?
That's the trust, the document, the comment says funds cannot be expended from the principal. So I assume the principal amount has remained the same since the trust was established. That would have
And
to be
that
the
means
case.
they've used all the interest.
Right, they're using the income.
Pardon?
That
They're
means
using
they've
the
used all
income.
the interest.
Right, but, well, okay. All right, I made my,
Are we really, is this the Hannah Lincoln Memorial thing? Are we really going there on this one?
Well, I know, but
Can we move on?
is everyone comfortable with adding the disbursement amount? Because that's not been in the past in comments and, you know, last year's comments. So is everyone comfortable with adding?
And a
what the
couple of years
disbursement
ago,
amount
we
was?
raised a question because they weren't making disbursements. And so the advice was given to the trustees that they should be making disbursements.
Okay,
That's
All
been
right,
since I've been on here, so.
And
all right.
I don't mean to belabor, but if they haven't been making disbursements and they've made this, is someone going to come back and say, well, what happened last year? Why didn't it get dispersed the year before? I mean, is it good to add more information?
I was just intending to do 2020, so I wouldn't add that 19 and 18 didn't have disbursements.
Yeah, it would just,
Yeah. Just as a point of fact, this amount was done in 2020.
a little bit of transparency.
Yeah.
Not to belabor the point.
And then when someone asks a question about it on the floor of town meeting, then Matt has to get up.
No one, Matt, no one ever asks. No one.
Shush, don't even invite that potential controversy.
Yeah.
Andy, do you have anything else to add? You have your hand up still?
no,
Okay,
Okay, so
everyone comfortable?
Oh, yeah.
All right, so we're gonna have Matt read out the recommended motion. And then we're gonna take a vote on it. Is that how we did that last year?
Julie,
I'm making a motion to approve the language, or I'm reading the actual recommendation from the
I'm
warrant.
asking, one second, just asking Bob.
Okay.
Point of order, Julie. It's my memory that in past agendas that we have distinguished between matters that are simply on the agenda for a hearing as opposed to matters that are on the agenda for a hearing and a vote, or sometimes it's just for votes. And tonight's agenda, I may be doing you a favor and saving you from reading the list of names 6 times. It just indicates that they're hearings. There's no indication of a vote.
All right,
So I think based on the way we've done things in the past, you'd have to defer votes until the next meeting.
okay. George, I'm adding that to the notebook. of
Thank you.
things. Yep. So I get to do all the embarrassing things this year. Okay.
Wait,
Thanks,
so
Bob.
can I ask a question? So we're gonna hear this and we're not gonna vote on these things?
We actually have done that with quite a few warrant articles in the past.
Yeah, but
When
not
we
the
hear-
perennials.
Well,
Well, I know, and I'm sorry about that.
it's just a point of order. If
I think my connection is getting terrible. So if I drop,
The
you'll know
select-
why.
The select board voted it.
Well,
They
they
did.
probably had the word vote in their agenda. So I didn't have the word vote on the agenda, so. We are going to go through and we're going to listen and go through each article tonight. And then next meeting, we'll just run through the votes. We don't need to have a discussion about them. Okay,
Right.
so. Sorry. Okay, Article B, assume liability for the DCR.
So the DCR does a number of projects in town and just as a matter of policy requires the town to assume liability for performing this work. At the select board hearing last, I think it was Thursday night, there was some discussion about whether this included Hingham DPW work in addition to DCR work. The answer to that is no. I don't know if anyone was thinking that. I'm trying to front run any questions from this group. That was the only discussion point with the select board last week. But this does, it's something we have to do to get those services in the town. And other than that, I didn't uncover any other potential questions, I guess.
Does anyone have any questions or comments for this article? Okay. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks.
Article C, reports of various town committees.
I have Article C, and I just have a quick point of clarification. I don't know if the select board has voted on this yet. They were going to be doing it tonight, right?
Yeah, so they did it earlier.
Did they
it was
do
on
it
their
prior
agenda.
to the?
No,
Oh, okay.
they would have done it while we were talking about. the
While we're
budget.
talking. Okay. Well,
And the reason why they voted it last week, and then they
Right.
realized that they were missing a couple of committees. So they
Right.
voted it again tonight.
and is it meant to be the list I have was taken from, I think, the email that you sent me that was updated by them. And is it meant to include all town committees that are, because I don't see the naming bylaw committee here. Which was a committee that I was on just prior to AdCom and had to drop to join AdCom. I'm just noticing that actually tonight.
Sarah, was that committee formed by town meeting?
No, it was appointed. So is that different?
I think Article C are committees that were appointed by town meeting, aren't they?
Ah. Okay.
I'm not really sure, but, and just to let you know, Julie and Bob, last Thursday's agenda for the Board of Selectmen does not say vote. It just says discussions.
So let's do it.
Just to let you know, I just looked.
Thank you. Sue, if you were here, if you sat next to me, I'd reach over and hug you. Let's get it
Okay.
done. I
I'm
mean,
not crossing Bob, and I'm also not going to get a nasty phone call from Victor Valterra for doing something that was out of order, because
Right.
he would.
Well, he's on the
So,
naming bylaw committee.
I know.
No,
I
so,
know.
okay, so I think I was confused then because I didn't know it was appointed by town meeting and not all appointed committees. So strike that comment. I'll just read the article.
Okay.
So Article C is to receive the reports, if any, of the following: Accessory Dwelling Unit Study Committee, Affordable Housing Trust, Audit Committee, Capital Outlay Committee, Climate Action Planning Committee, Commission on Disability, Community Preservation Committee, Conservation Commission, Country Club Management Committee, Council on Aging, Energy Action Committee, JR Hall Trustees, Harbor Development Committee, Hingham Historic Districts Commission, the Historian Historical Commission, Board of Managers of Lincoln Apartments, LLC, Long Range Waste and Recycling Committee, Master Plan Committee, Memorial Bell Tower Committee, Open Space Acquisition Committee, Scholarship Fund Committee, 2017 School Building Committee, and Water Transition and Evaluation Committee, or act on anything related thereto. And the comment, which I took mainly from Al's comments last year, which I thought were succinct. The town is indeed fortunate to have many public spirited citizens willing to work in these capacities. The quality of life and quality of governance of our community is greatly strengthened by these contributions of these citizens and their work on these committees. We thank all of these committees and their members for their excellent service. We recommend that all of these posts and committees be continued. And the only note that I make is last year there were a couple committees being discharged. This year, I do not have information from the select board that any are being discharged at this time.
Right. Okay. Anyone have any questions or comments for Sarah? Because we're not voting this tonight, I will just double check about the naming bylaw committee, so we'll know for sure that
Okay.
nothing was
That may be my misunderstanding of
made in airing.
the
No.
scope, so that's fine.
I'll ask the question. All right, thank you. So next we have the building department revolving fund, which is Tina.
That is me. So this is just the perennial article that authorizes the building department to use $350,000 in proceeds from permits to pay half of the salary of the building inspector, half of the salaries of the 2 administrators, and the costs for the fee for service inspectors and their other general expenses. Covers $350,000 from the building department budget. The building department revolving fund total balance right now is $460,000, so we can comfortably cover this. And its use is limited to plumbing, gas, and electric inspectors, anything they buy, need, or use, including mileage.
All right.
Andy, did you hear that? There's money in a revolving fund.
Well, I was waiting if he was going to say something because that was his big question last year with this article.
Watch out, Tina.
I tried to front run that. I watched that.
Have you checked the numbers, Tina? Does that 350 cover half the salaries requested?
The number is good, yes.
Perfect.
Anyone have any questions or comments for Tina? All right. It's good use of funds. Thank you. Okay, and our last article this evening is acceptance of easements.
Okay, that's me again. And I realized halfway through the last one, I don't actually have to read the article, but I kept going because I was in the middle. So I won't do that now. I'll jump to the comment. But this is basically the town in doing various public works projects, putting in a hydrant or some cables underground, what have you, may need to accept an easement from a private property owner. And this article would authorize the town to do so, limited only to an easement that they are being given for free, nothing that the town has to pay for, and it is limited in scope for the 1 fiscal year. And I think that's, so I'll read the comment. The town benefits from many easements over private property throughout Hingham from time to time. The town, particularly its Department of Public Works, requires new easements in order to complete roadway and other public works projects. At times, the town receives requests from private property owners to relocate easements held by the town on their property. Under Massachusetts law, town meeting approval is required for the select board to accept such easements. This article would allow the select board to accept such easements during the coming year and thus avoid potentially expensive delays and inconvenience to projects that benefit the town. This article is intended solely to cover easements voluntarily granted to the town and would not allow the select board to accept easements that require funds to acquire them. Furthermore, the authority conferred by this article is not unlimited in time. It is limited to the coming fiscal year. If continuing authority is required, the next annual town meeting may be asked to approve it. And thanks to Andy, I cribbed his language except for select board references.
Yes. Does anyone have any questions for Sarah or comments?
So Julie, I just want to say Bob was right. I just went and checked the agendas and the minutes from last year. We had the hearing and then we voted the next meeting on Hannah Whiting, etc. So
see, I should have gone to law school last summer. I'm telling you. No, I'm just kidding. I'll tighten it up. I'll tighten it up.
You'd have useless knowledge too.
All right. Okay, so that's it for acceptance of easements. No one has anything? Okay. So thank you, Paul, for putting together these articles. It's a great start, even though we can't vote on them.
Please tell me you went and copy and pasted from what the rest of us all did. There was no real original thought that went into this.
They were stressing big time all weekend. I just know it. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so that concludes our warrant article hearings for tonight. Next up, we have something that I know is going to just make everybody really smile, really big smiles about the advisory committee handbook update. Vote. And I do have the word vote on the agenda. Sorry, I'm getting punchy, but tonight's the night. So we heard earlier at the select board's meeting, they had their affirmative vote on the gender neutral updates to the general bylaws. So now that paves the way for us to be able to finally vote on our handbook. And I want to thank Tina and Brenda again for their hard work on this. And now it's going to be off their plate and they never have to think about it again until next year. But anyway, this is version 13 of the handbook, and George has his hand raised.
Okay, I was going to do it afterwards, Julie, but we had on the agenda the disbursement of electric light department receipts, Article H. Did we forget that one, or?
George, I was just trying to call up the agenda to see.
Yeah, I mean, we can do it after we do the handbook, but.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think I put all my brain cells into that PowerPoint. So sorry.
It
All
was
right,
wicked
we'll
good
go-
though, Julie.
And then we'll go back.
That was good.
Okay, so we'll go back, Caitlin, and I'm sorry. I just didn't print it out. So, okay,
Are we voting on something momentarily?
yes. So can I get a motion to approve version 13 of the advisory committee handbook?
Motion to
Moved.
approve. Yeah, so moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
By roll call vote, Bob,
Aye.
George,
Aye.
Dave,
Aye.
Evan,
Aye.
Andy. Andy's an aye, right?
Andy's
Yeah,
asleep.
okay. I
Where's
see his
your
mouth
mug,
moving.
Julie? He's on mute.
I,
Dave Aline,
Aye.
Can't make this shit up.
Brenda,
Aye.
Kristen,
Aye.
Tina,
Aye.
Matt,
Aye.
Caitlin,
Aye.
Sarah.
Aye.
Okay, so 12-0 vote. All right, thank you.
I
So-
apologize for the profanity too. I didn't realize my mic was on.
Are you gonna call me names now? Oh, great. Okay, so now we're gonna go to Article L. Caitlin.
Julie, it's an 8.
Article H.
Ah!
One night, Julie.
Okay, I'm not
One night.
usually this
Okay.
much of a flake, okay? Article H, disbursement
H.
of electric light department receipts.
Yes, okay, so this warrant article covers Hingham Municipal Lighting Plan and the disbursement of electric light department receipts for billing, from billing customers within a 12-month period related to HMLP being self-funded. So I'm just reading the comment. The Hingham Municipal Lighting Plant, HMLP, is self-funding. Funds collected from billing customers are used to pay all expenses incurred by the plant. The HMLP board has an agreement with the town whereby HMLP makes payment in lieu of taxes to the town. The pilot amount is calculated by multiplying the number of kilowatt hours sold by HMLP in the prior year by 0.0025 cents, with the minimum payment to the town of $450K. Based on the sales from the last several years, it is estimated that this year's payment will be approximately $500,000. The plan's pilot to the town has the effect of reducing the town's tax rate.
Okay. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions about this article? Bob?
I don't have a question, but just a reminder that when we met with the HMLP last year, they are pretty flush with cash. And of course, they did the town a favor by, was it 80,000, Brenda, that they gave to the Climate Action Planning Committee?
Yes, it was.
And, you know, if there's an appropriate budget expenditure this year that might tailor with HMLP, we might want to have a discussion with them about helping us out again.
Is this on the agenda?
It's kind of tangentially related to the HMLP article.
Okay.
Brenda.
Two things, just, I think, Caitlin, you're gonna want to change the Board of Selectmen to the Select Board in the last part of your
Yeah,
comment. Last year's language. But yeah, Bob, I think HMLP is doing a lot of work to figure out how to use the funds they have to help pay for their new transmission line. So I don't think they're going to be looking like they are so flush with cash going forward. But
thank you.
One question there though, Brenda, does the transition line, is that something that would get approved by the town?
Going out for the debt service to pay for the rest of the construction costs, yes, would get approved by the town. But HMLP itself makes that decision.
They make the decision about the transition line?
Yeah.
Okay.
But that won't be at town meeting this year, just
Okay.
the transfer
Not
of
the
the
construction,
piece of
just
land.
but right.
Yeah. Okay, does anyone have any other questions for Caitlin? All right. Thank you. Sorry about jumping past that. Okay, so just we have two quick liaison updates. Dave, ACES.
There will be, the school has completed its budget hearings, and there will be an ACES meeting probably a week from Thursday at 6 before our AdCom meeting at 7. So stay tuned to that. No real changes in the budget other than since the January 20th version. And down the road, if anybody is interested in looking at the budget hearings, and to be frank, I'm not sure you're going to get a whole lot out of them. There's some documents you may find more useful than the budget hearings themselves on video, but I'll send Julie the links to all 3 budget hearing recordings, and that way you can take a peek if you'd like.
Thank you. Okay, and the Hingham Affordable Housing Trust?
So this year, Article DD, which is the transfer of land from the select board to the Hingham Affordable Housing Trust, has come up again. It was on there last year, but got pulled. It was suggested last year that they do a little bit more work to see if there was some issues with the neighbors, if there was any easement issues, and they asked them to also do some soil testing to see if the land was actually buildable before they transferred the land. So that those easement issues have been resolved. The land is being tested right now, and it's being done pro bono from McSweeney and Margits. And so the results of those will indicate whether they move forward with this transfer. So there's a possibility it could be pulled again. Hopefully not. If there are no issues, they will need to go forward with additional soil testing that the Affordable Housing Board will have to bear the cost of. But I believe that as long as there's no issues, they would move forward with that. And then just one other thing that came up in the meeting, there seems to be discrepancies of the number of affordable housing units in the town. So they're going through Jack Balby from Affordable Housing and Emily Wentworth from Community Planning are meeting to try to work out what the correct number is, so that number isn't reported somewhere that is incorrect. So more to come on what the actual correct number is.
Great, that's a great idea. All right, anyone have any questions? Okay, so then we come to discussion of advisory committee housekeeping items. So our warrant article process is underway now. And when you are done with your warrant article, it needs to go to an editor. So we have split up the list of articles, and I will send this out in an email, but just to let you know that articles A through Q you'll send to Tina for her editing, and then the rest go to Daveline. But then Daveline and Tina will swap their articles so they don't have to self-edit, which is important. So there is that. And the next meeting will be, so wait, Daveline, do you have anything to add that you want to add about that?
No,
Okay.
I think that's fine.
Okay. And George is going to build out the WAS, the warrant article status summary document. So we'll get going on that. So we'll have updates so we know where the articles are in process, and we'll be able to plug in the dates, the hearing dates for the select board, and when we get to hear them. So we'll have more information soon. The next meeting will be next Tuesday, February 1st, for the AdCom school committee joint meeting with the select board. We get to hear the final report of the Sustainable Budget Task Force. And that should go on for a little while. So that will be the only agenda item for our meeting next Tuesday. Then we're going to meet on Thursday, February 3rd. That's because it's February. We get to meet 2 times a week, except for school vacation week. So on the agenda for that meeting, we will be voting the articles that we heard tonight. Then we will be hearing and voting articles C, J, and M. And then we're going to go through the harbor master's budget, hopefully the Weir River water budget. And we're going to go through the new 5-year forecast document. So lots to look forward to. And then on a personal note, I just want to add, for anyone who used to serve on AdCom with Eric Haskell, that he moved off AdCom a couple years ago, but he and his wife Anne welcomed a baby, Andrew, last month. And I'm going to forward the birth announcement email that that he had sent to me, and so you can congratulate Eric and Anne. And I saw him briefly the other day. I dropped something off, and he said the baby's been treating them well, so that's good. He didn't look too tired, so that's good. So. Okay, matters not anticipated within 48 hours of the meeting. I just want to note that Sue sent to me and Daveline that Shrek budget number has been updated. Do you want to give that information, or I have it handy, Daveline, if you want?
Yeah, I have it here
too.
too. So
Yeah.
for Shrek, the actual assessment is $991,419.24. which is an increase of $50,237.24, which I think is somewhere around 5.35% increase. So it's significantly more than what our placeholder, well, it seems significant to me than what our placeholder number was, but.
Yeah. And that's because they just had their meeting, and that's because we have had more, a higher call volume, right, Sue?
Right,
Probably.
right. And it's just it's a
Yeah,
formula.
the calls were higher, and as we all know, budgets are never with cents, so we will drop those cents. We'll round it up to the nearest dollar.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, great. So can I get a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Julie, we got a hand up. Andy's got a hand up.
I just
Sorry,
wanted to, I just want to ask Evan if he realized that Ada Bacon, who established the Hannah Lincoln Whiting Fund, is the granddaughter of Benjamin Lincoln, whose house we now own. You probably knew that, but just in case.
I think the Historical Society owns it.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Second the motion to
That we-
adjourn.
Second, yep.
Okay. All right, all in favor by roll call? Bob?
Aye.
Aye.
George? George?
Aye.
Dave?
Aye.
Evan?
Aye.
Andy?
Aye.
Daveline?
Aye.
Brenda?
Aye.
Kristen?
Aye.
Tina?
Aye.
Matt?
Aye.
Caitlin,
Aye.
Sarah.
Hi.